The call came just before dusk. A distressed park ranger had spotted a lone bison wandering near the edge of a dried-up riverbed in Yellowstone. The animal's movements were sluggish, its head hanging low, its massive frame barely carrying its own weight. At first they thought it was simply injured, perhaps a fight with another bison or a failed escape from a predator. But then came the truly disturbing detail. It was covered in barnacles. That shouldn't be possible. Barnacles don't grow on mammals. They're parasites of the sea, clinging to the hulls of ships, to whales and seals, not to a land animal hundreds of miles from any ocean. Yet, when Dr. Samuel Hayes, the lead wildlife veterinarian, arrived with his assistant Ayla Carter, the moment they laid eyes on the creature, they knew something was deeply, horribly wrong. The bison stood motionless near the bank, its breathing shallow and uneven. Its once thick hide was infested with barnacle-like growths, hundreds of them, encrusting its back, its sides, its legs. Some had fused together, forming grotesque, coral-like structures, pulsating as though something inside them was still alive. Dark, honeycomb-like wounds festered beneath them, leaking blackened pus. Ayla gagged as the wind shifted, carrying the stench of decay, salt water, and something else, something rancid. Samuel approached slowly, lifting his binoculars for a closer look. He had treated bison with parasites before, ticks, worms, even mange. But this was something he had never seen. "Jesus," he muttered, "how the hell does something like this happen?" The bison exhaled a deep, rattling breath. Its dark, glassy eyes locked onto his. For a moment, Samuel felt something he couldn't explain, a deep, primal unease. Not fear, not exactly. Something older. Something that whispered to the part of his brain that hadn't evolved past the instinct to run. But he didn't. Instead, he took another step forward. "Easy, big guy," he murmured. "We're here to help you." The creature's body shuddered violently, its knees buckling. For a split second, Samuel thought it was about to charge, but then it collapsed. Ayla rushed forward, kneeling beside it. "Sam, we need to move fast. If it's gone into shock, we might not have much time." Samuel grabbed his radio. "We need the full medical team here, ASAP, and a transport truck. We're taking it in." There was a long pause on the other end. Then, the ranger's voice crackled through. "Are you sure you want to move it?" "What do you mean?" Samuel asked. "A beat." Then the ranger spoke again, his voice lower this time. "I don't know what's wrong with it, Doc, but the rest of the herd left it behind." Samuel's stomach twisted. Bison herds were fiercely protective. If one of their own was sick or injured, they would often stand by it, guard it from predators. But this one had been abandoned, left to suffer alone. Ayla didn't seem to notice his hesitation. She was already setting up the IV drip, her hands moving with practiced precision. "Sam, we need to sedate it before it panics." Samuel nodded, though his mind was screaming at him to reconsider. The herd had left this one behind. Not just left it, exiled it. And he had to wonder if they knew something he didn't. Something was deeply, horribly wrong. But there was no turning back now. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Samuel raised the tranquilizer gun. And he pulled the trigger. The bison's body twitched as the tranquilizer dart embedded deep into its thick hide. A few seconds passed, then a minute. At first, nothing happened. Samuel and Ayla exchanged uneasy glances. The dosage should have worked by now. But instead of collapsing, the bison shuddered violently. Its breaths came in short, desperate gasps, its massive chest rising and falling like a panicked drumbeat. It should have been unconscious by now, but it wasn't. Samuel felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. Something was resisting the sedation. Then, the barnacles began to move. Ayla let out a sharp gasp, stepping back instinctively. The encrusted formations on the bison's body twitched like living things. The largest barnacle lodged deep into the animal's shoulder, split open with a sickening squelch, releasing a thin stream of black, inky liquid. Something long and writhing curled from inside, before retracting just as quickly. Samuel's hands trembled around the tranquilizer gun. "What the hell?" The bison finally let out a long, guttural groan, its legs buckling beneath it as it collapsed onto the icy ground. Its body convulsed once, then stilled. The team rushed in, quickly securing it with medical restraints, though now Samuel wasn't sure they were for the animal's safety or their own. As Ayla pressed a stethoscope to its chest, her face paled. Its heart rate is irregular, like it's trying to stop, but something won't let it. Samuel barely heard her. His eyes were locked on the strange barnacle-like formations. They weren't just attached to the bison, they were burrowing inside it. "This isn't a normal parasite infestation," he muttered. "This is something else. Something unnatural." The bison's black sticky wounds oozed onto the snow, the tar-like liquid spreading outward like tendrils. And the air smelled wrong, like something deep and stagnant, like the ocean floor. And then, in the distance, they heard it, a deep, long bellow, not from the bison in front of them, but from the ridge above. Samuel turned his head slowly. A herd of at least 30 bison stood motionless along the ridge, watching them. Their massive, shaggy bodies were silhouetted against the dying sunlight, completely still. "Why aren't they coming closer?" Ayla whispered. Samuel swallowed. Because they know. The herd had abandoned this bison, not because it was sick, but because it wasn't theirs anymore. A sudden violent spasm rippled through the unconscious bison's body. Its head twitched, its mouth opened, but not like a bison's should. Something slithered beneath its skin. Samuel took a slow step backward. His instinct screamed run, but it was too late. One of the barnacles on its side ruptured completely, a black tendril whipping outward and wrapping around Ayla's wrist. She screamed. Ayla's scream tore through the frozen air as the black tendril tightened around her wrist, its slick, rubbery texture writhing like something alive. She tried to yank away, but the thing held fast, pulsating against her skin. Samuel didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing his hunting knife from his belt, and with one brutal motion, sliced through the tendril. A horrible wet screech echoed from the bison's gaping mouth. The severed tendril recoiled violently, slithering back into the honeycomb-like wound, disappearing beneath its flesh. Ayla stumbled backward, panting, clutching her wrist. Samuel grabbed her shoulders, his heart hammering. "Are you okay? Did it—" Ayla's eyes were wide, filled with raw terror. "It was inside me, Sam." He looked down at her wrist. The skin was red and raw, but there was something worse. Thin black veins had begun to creep outward from where the tendril had grabbed her. It was spreading. Samuel clenched his teeth. "We have to go, now!" Ayla nodded shakily, her breath hitching. What about the bison?" Samuel turned toward the massive, twitching creature. The barnacles had stopped moving. The black liquid from its wounds had begun to retreat, slithering back inside like something preparing for hibernation. It wasn't dying, it was waiting. And suddenly, the air shifted. The bison herd on the ridge let out a low, unified bellow. Samuel's blood ran cold. They were calling it back. Without another word, he grabbed Ayla's arm and ran. They sprinted through the snow, their boots crunching against the ice, Ayla gasping as she clutched her arm. The black veins were crawling further up her forearm. "Sam, it's burning." "We'll fix it. Just keep moving." Behind them, the sound of shifting heavy weight filled the air. Samuel dared to glance back. The bison was standing. It shouldn't have been able to move. The tranquilizer should have kept it down for hours. But there it was, rising, towering, staring. And then, it began to walk, not toward them, toward the herd. The 30 silent bison that had watched them from the ridge turned in unison and began moving as well, welcoming the infected creature back into their ranks. Like nothing had ever happened. Samuel and Ayla burst through the tree line, stumbling onto the main road, where their rescue truck waited. The rest of the medical team was rushing toward them, concern in their eyes. But Samuel couldn't speak. He turned back to the ridge. The herd was gone. No tracks, no sign they had ever been there. The only proof of what had happened was the black pulsing veins climbing up Ayla's arm. The haunting truth. Hours later, back at the medical station, Samuel and the doctors scrubbed Ayla's skin raw. The black veins faded, but never fully disappeared. No matter what they tried, a faint, inky trace remained beneath her flesh. And at night, she swore she could still hear it. The sound of a deep, distant bellow, calling to her.